This is the DAR Today podcast, and I'm your host, Brooke Bullmaster Stewart. Well, this week we will continue with our series on the DAR Museum. Wasn't that neat a couple of weeks ago with Myrnie Crane and all those segments where they talked about the DAR Museum staff and the different ways that they were trying to make our museum collection accessible to everyone. And I loved your comments about that. I could tell that you appreciated that as well. Well, today we have a segment with the DAR Museum Director, Heidi Campbell-Shoaf, where we do a bit of a walkabout through the museum. She talks about the current exhibit there. We also talk about the origins of the museum. And it's kind of neat how our current exhibit that's there right now and to the end of the year really ties in with the DAR founders and their original vision for our DAR Museum. It's kind of neat the way that ties in together. And where would our museum be without our museum docents, both those that are physically in the building and our correspondent docents that are around the world that tell people about the different items in our DAR museum? Have you ever considered being a correspondent docent? I am very proud to say that I am one, and I would encourage you to look into that and see if it's something that you would like to do to bring the DAR museum directly to people in your community. It's a really fun thing to do. And we'll have a short little interview with a couple of our museum docents that I happened upon while I was there in our buildings in DC. One is a museum docent and the other was a docent in training. So we got to talk with them, and it was so great that they were willing to take the time and do a quick interview with us. So we've got a big episode for you today. So let's jump right in to that interview with our museum docents. And hey, thank you so much for being here with us today. So we have the privilege today to speak with Cathy Jabara from Virginia, who's a docent here at the DAR Museum. Cathy, tell us what you love most about being a docent here.
I would say the main thing that I love is being able to be close to history. I think that the DAR Museum just does a wonderful job in preserving colonial and pre-industrial and even post-industrial up to the 1930s history. And it's so wonderful to go in and see all the artifacts and items and then learn about the history of the items because I'm an avid history reader. And I'm also very interested in historical preservation. And I'm so impressed with what the DAR does to preserve our history. And the fact that they can preserve it in the museum is just a big plus, and I get to be a part of it.
Is it exciting to see the people's faces when they come in and see certain items?
Oh, yes. A lot of people come in, and they're just so impressed with the museum. And I've had at least one man that I took around, and he said, this is such a hidden gem of Washington, D.C. And he says, we really need to get the word out. But most people even if they're just looking around, they come back and they're just so impressed. And it's wonderful to help them, and also to help them, if I can, to appreciate the museum.
Thanks for your time today, Cathy. And Marilyn Welschenbach from Virginia, tell us about why you're here today.
I'm here being trained by Cathy. I'm a docent in training. This is my second time to shadow her. I became interested because I'm a corresponding docent. I was here decorating during Christmas and met someone who had been doing that. I thought that's something that I could do, to visit other chapters. But then one other chapter member from Pentagon asked if I knew anything about coming to do a tour. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And so I thought, I can do that. So I then applied to be a docent, and now I'm in training. I'm excited to be here in the building.
Marilyn, thank you so much for volunteering your time this way and taking time with us today. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So I'm speaking today with Heidi Campbell-Shoaf, the director of the DAR Museum. It's so great to speak with you today, Heidi.
I'm happy to have you here.
Well, tell us a little bit about the DAR Museum here.
So the DAR Museum was created in 1890. Right at the same time as the organization was created. So that first meeting, they were thinking about having a museum. And they created the museum to collect historical objects and preserve them. So again, the preservation and education portion of the mission was really high uppermost in their minds. And so Over the years, the mission really hasn't changed. The museum collects and presents things related to the American home. And as you probably know, we have 30 period rooms, and we have a large collection of objects such as silver and jewelry and quilts, ceramics, anything that you would find in the home. You might call all of these things material culture. That's the sort of the academic word for it. So that is what we present in the DAR Museum. The strengths of the DAR Museum is the provenance that comes with the objects that we have in the collection. Well over 90% of the collection has been donated by DAR members. And of course, as we know, DAR members love their genealogy and family history. And so many of the things that come to us from members come along with the family history. So unlike some other museums, we have really story-rich objects that we can display and share with the public. The DAR Museum has been open to the public since the beginning. It has always been free. So people did not have to pay admission. We presented programs very, very early on in the 1920s and 30s. We have a long history of being a place to visit in Washington, D.C. We're standing right now, if you hear an echo, in our study gallery. We developed this study gallery in 2017 when we remodeled this main central gallery that in our headquarters building that was originally created in 1950. We divided this long room into two portions, a study gallery, which enables us to bring things out that would be more difficult to see if it were in a period room. So if you're very interested in a particular type of material, like silver or watches or early photographs, you could pull a drawer open and get up close and personal with some of these objects.
Oh, exciting.
The study gallery rotates, the objects rotate through on a regular basis, and so it never is the same way twice. So if you visit now, you come back in a month or two, things will be different.
Tell us a little bit about an exhibit that you have going on right now.
Our newest exhibit opened last month in March, and it is called Sewn in America. And we're going to head on over there and take a look. The subtitle is Making Meaning Memory. We have collections of samplers made by young women. We have collections of quilts made by older women. We have costume collection that dates back to the early 1700s and all the way up into the early 1900s. So we have a wide array, and the curator for this exhibition, Alden O'Brien, who is our curator of costume and textiles, decided to bring all of those types of sewing together in one place. And she brought together the average and everyday, like what we're standing next to right now is a display of representations of items that would have been necessary in an early American home. The sheets and the towels and the shirts, the dresses and the knit socks, and every single thing, a household would have needed to be sewn. So we investigate in this exhibition, the meaning part of sewing as well. So, how women expressed their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings. The exhibition includes objects from the 1700s all the way into the present day. So it covers, centuries of sewing history. We have a COVID data quilt that a woman created. We borrowed this from the maker, and it shows the data that was being presented during 2020 and through 2022. And she creates a very colorful quilt with greens and pinks and purples. to represent how cases in Knox County, Tennessee progressed through the pandemic.
Oh,
so it's
what a poignant reminder of something we all went through.
Right, and it's a very local history document as
Yes.
well. This is fun. A lot of people mention this is a bicentennial dress from 1976.
Oh, from 1976.
1976.
You can tell the 70s gown is the green with a little bit of 70s lace.
Yeah.
Very much that 70s lace that we all had, or those that are older anyway, and a bit of a purple ribbon around the waist, but very much trying to evoke that feeling of colonial days. And it'll be interesting to see for America 250 what people do, the costumes they create. Would you tell us a little bit about the quilts that you have?
Yes, we have a large collection of quilts that span centuries. This area shows some quilts that speak to heritage. The one on the far right is actually a Hungarian Harvest Festival quilt made in the 1930s, but made here in the United States. So it was a way to harken back to the heritage of an immigrant. The quilt next to it is a Hawaiian-made quilt, and this was made in the 1920s. I love like the orangey, gold, yellow against the white. It really pops.
It feels like Hawaii, especially that Samoan part of their culture. It's beautiful.
The exhibit actually runs until the end of the year. It just opened last month, so there's plenty of time to come by and see it, and maybe even come by more than once, so you can absorb all of it, because there are close to 150 objects to see, both big and small. I've mentioned that we have borrowed a few things, but by and large, this exhibit draws on the collection that the DAR Museum maintains. From its beginning, the DAR Museum was about the home. It wasn't a museum intended to be a museum about the American Revolution. And I've done some research on the history of the museum and how the early women were collecting for the museum. And there are even poems about collecting for the museum and focusing on things of the home. These period rooms obviously speak to that. And the period rooms were created in Memorial Continental Hall in what used to be offices. So when the building was originally built, these rooms were offices for the National Society. And the National Society grew so quickly that in the 1920s, so within 10, 15 years, they needed more room. And so they built an administrative building, and a lot of the offices started moving out of Memorial Continental Hall and left these interesting shaped rooms. We're standing today, right now, in front of the Michigan room, and it represents a 1920s library in Michigan. And it's fun, especially when you take groups of younger people around, people who don't obviously don't remember the 1920s.
Who of us
but
does?
Who does anymore?
I barely remember the 2020s.
Right. But to point out, I just had a group of young women through yesterday, and I was talking about the different things that you find here in this library, like a typewriter, which was, very significant in the early 1900s for both, home use, but also office use. And it expanded women's work opportunities and to talk about women's history in that way. So we try to also incorporate women's history in our tours and in our programs. We just, at the end of last month, had our a women's history costume party. They were encouraged to dress up portraying someone they admire, some woman from history that they admire. So that was a lot of fun.
I saw that on your Instagram page.
Sometimes these events help break down that barrier, that maybe that hesitation to like, am I allowed here? And it makes the museum and the building in general, because it's an imposing building. And I think that's why the founders wanted the museum free and open to the public so that people can come in and learn all kinds of different work that the DAR does.
And you've made a living, breathing space instead of just a stagnant, this is where things get old.
Yes.
And they just sit there.
Yes.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much for your time today, for showing us the museum and talking to us all about it.
Well, thank you for coming.
Well, we leave you today with not a quote, but a bit of a poem. As you may remember in the interview that we had with the DAR Museum director, Heidi Campbell-Shoaf, when she referenced that our DAR magazine at the time in 1911, when the DAR members were encouraging people to donate items that they may have in their homes from their ancestors to the museum, there was one particular poem that is entitled Revolutionary Relics, and it is from the August 1911 American Monthly Magazine, and I wanted to read a bit of it here. Great-grandmother's spinning wheel stands in the hall. That is her portrait there. Great-grandfather's sword hangs near on the wall. What do you girlies care? That in 1776, one bitter winter's night, when the air was full of sleet and snow and the kitchen fire burned bright, toward the loom in the kitchen she drew, she had finished that day, a beautiful blanket of brown and blue. Was it plaited this way? It was just like this, but faded and worn and full of holes and stain. When our soldier grandsire came back one morn to wife and child again, when his eyes were dim and her hair was white, waiting the master's call, she finished this blanket one winter's night that hangs here on the wall. Great-grandfather sat in that old armchair, grandmother rocked by his side, till the master called through the sweet June air. They both went out with the tide. Well, thanks for listening, and be well, dear friends. Let's celebrate the stars and stripes forever, and remember, with all of your ancestors behind you, you are the result of the love of thousands. Well, this podcast was written and produced by our incredible team of writers and editors, and we are, as always, so grateful for President General Pamela Rouse Wright and Historian General Suzanne Heskey for their constant guidance. To Heidi Campbell-Shoaf and Cathy, Jabara, and Marilyn Welschenbach for being so generous with their time. The National Society Daughters of the American Revolution is a nonprofit, non-political, volunteer women's service organization dedicated to promoting patriotism, preserving American history, and securing America's future through better education for children. Members are all lineal descendants of those who supported the cause of independence in the Revolutionary War. For more information, please visit dar.org. This is the DAR Today podcast.